Hello, incredibly beautiful and intelligent people. Today we will be talking about the Cold War in Canada. So grab your maple syrup, but make sure it's not Mrs. Butterworth because we're headed north. Brrr. Okay, so Canada's focus in the Cold War was self-protection. Some say they followed U.S. policies into their NATO membership. The U.S. was, however, Canada's most important ally. They did disagree when considering foreign policy. Prime examples of this are in the Korean War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Between 1945 and 1981, Canada experienced social and political reform. These changes affected public perception of Canada's role in the Cold War. Canada was thrusted into the Cold War soon after celebrating the victories of World War II. A young Russian named Igor Guzenko walked into the newsroom of the Ottawa Citizen and announced he had proof of a widespread Soviet spy ring operating in Canada. This caused a chain reaction of anti-communist relations across the West. CBC. Soon after tensions started to rise, Canada saw an increase in military spending. Now, the beginning of the Cold War. Some historians say the start of the Cold War was in Ottawa. A Soviet embassy employee, Igor Guzenko, smuggled 109 documents out of the embassy and tried to present them to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Department of Justice and the Ottawa Journal. The documents showed evidence of a Soviet spy ring in Canada that demonstrated a Soviet expansionist and pro-communist group that infiltrated the Canadian Civil Service, the British High Commission, atomic researchers, and the Canadian Parliament. This changed Canada's view on the Soviet Union and led to the Red Scare. Their focus on national defense grew with the threat of nuclear weapons, boom, and they joined many international organizations, including the UN, NATO, and the British Commonwealth. In NATO, Canada was responsible for patrolling the North Atlantic. These social and foreign changes, all originating in Ottawa, largely contributed to the Canadian involvement in foreign conflicts, especially against the Soviet Union, and possibly contributed to the Red Scare in America, which escalated the Cold War. The response to the Korean War. Canada lent resources and soldiers to fight along with the United States in the conflict, largely because their foreign policy aligned with this attempt to prevent North Korean aggression. In response to Korea, Canada used 45% of the annual budget to initiate a rearmament. Their defense spending increased from $493 million in 1950 to $1.16 million 1 year later. The size of their military also increased. With General MacArthur's actions, Canadians did begin to reconsider their involvement in the UN, but ultimately they remained a member. Political change. After the Suez Crisis in Egypt, Canadians were unhappy with Canada's unwillingness to support the UK and France in this crisis. They voted the previous Liberal Party government out of power and elected John Diefenbaker. Diefenbaker was a progressive conservative who was anti-communist and pro-NATO, but he also thought it was important to demonstrate Canadian autonomy from the United States. He created a binational agreement called the North American Aerospace Defense Command. This basically said that both nations would work together to prevent Soviet nuclear missile attacks on North America. This was put in use during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The response to the Cuban Missile Crisis. With U.S. trade withdrawal from Canada, the Canadian Parliament tried to make its own agreements that would benefit Canadian companies. However, both the public and the Parliament were split when it came to the actual missile crisis. One half wanted to agree to the U.S.'s request for aid and cooperation, but the other half feared this would anger the Soviets and would put their country in danger. They also wanted to act independently from the U.S. It was later revealed that the Canadian Defense Minister put Canadian forces on alert without informing the Parliament. This led to the collapse of the government, and Secretary of State Lester B. Pearlson became the new Prime Minister. Mystery document. So now I will be guessing what this mystery document is. Oh. Okay. An international commission shall be set up for the control and supervision over the application of the provisions of the agreement on the cessation of hostilities. In Vietnam, it shall be composed of representatives of the following states: Canada, India, and Poland. It shall be presided over by the representative of India. Steve, is this the Declaration of Independence? Ah, shucks. That was actually volume 935 of something. An international commission, yep, that's what we'll have. Volume 935, number 13295 of the United Nations Treaty Collection. The new administration in Canada led to work on the International Commission for Supervision and Control of Vietnam. With this, Canada was obliged to remain neutral and gave it the rationale to not join the U.S. in fighting the Vietnam War. However, Canada provided humanitarian assistance to South Vietnam through the Red Cross while developing new prerequisites for engaging in war and joining new allies. So what are the key takeaways of all of this? Throughout the Cold War, Canada's involvement is typically underplayed, but many social and political changes in Canada resulted from their involvement. They began to focus on defense of their country, as well as asserting their autonomy from the U.S. Canada increased foreign involvement when they joined the UN and NATO. This contributed to Canadian fear of the Soviet Union and communism. With involvement in foreign conflicts, including the Korean War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War, Canadian foreign policy evolved to become what it is today. Thank you so much for watching. You're beautiful. I love you.